He actually had set up an RSS feed from the blog to, I think it was Campaign Monitor he was using as the email tool at the time. But literally every Wednesday at 5:30, an email would go out to people who had subscribed with the new blog posts that had been added to the blog. But it meant that he was forced to write at least one post or a source of
That's
post every
awesome.
week. Like,
That's so interesting. Hey, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Content Briefly. Today is part one with John Collins. This is actually a repurposed recording of an office hours that we did with John about 18 months ago. The next episode will be an update that was just recently recorded about his time as a marketing advisor and consultant over the last couple of years. In this one, we talked all about his career at Intercom and Ramp, and I decided to include this in the podcast feed because there's just so much there. He talks a lot about the strategies that he created and put into execution at both companies. They're actually very different strategies, so that in it of itself is pretty interesting. Anyways, there's just like so much rich stuff in this conversation that I wanted to put in the feed, let people have the opportunity to check out before we have an update with John on his time as an advisor and freelancer, which is totally different and also an interesting conversation. So that one will be next. But this is a great conversation. It's, like I said, 18 months old, but absolutely evergreen. Lots of good stuff in here. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I hope you do too. John, you're a legend in the content marketing space. I've always looked up to you, always admired your work. You've done some amazing things at Intercom and Ramp. You're consulting now. I have so many questions about all these things. I also want to let people know if you have questions for John, leave them in the chat. I'll be happy to queue them up. I think the first place I would love to start. So you came to B2B SaaS content marketing from journalism, which I think is,
yeah,
I see, like I sort of see the line, like I see how it impacted the work that you guys did at Intercom. And I remember I interviewed Jeffrey Keating a few years back, probably 5 years back, about Intercom stuff and just learning about how you guys ran things. Pretty amazing, I thought, how and I assume this came from you, this really strong emphasis on subject matter expertise, right? Like the content team was serving as facilitators for subject matter expertise as opposed to just content creators. Is that accurate? And can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, no, it's 100%. And not to be provocative at the beginning, but no one really cares what marketers think. But not to be facetious, but we were, particularly in the early days at Intercom, we mostly were selling to like founders and like product people at like early stage startups or relatively early stage startups. And so, I think to really speak to them in a way that they like, it would resonate with them. It needed to come from the subject matter experts. So we used all sorts of ways to make sure we got like the deep insights that those people had into product building. Because basically someone, the person who was responsible for the product had to make the decision to integrate Intercom, which for people who don't know is like a customer communications tool, but you integrate it deeply with your own product. And so you had to basically speak to those people, give them, I suppose, like knowledge that like felt, you were adding something to the conversation. It's like, I used to always kind of joke that, product people would, read your 2,000 word post about like how you do your road mapping process. As Intercom started to sell to salespeople, it was like, give me your, you're wasting my time with the headline. Give me what you've got straight away. Support people were just like delighted that anyone was writing for them and like, really appreciated any kind of empathy you could show for their task. So like, it was really all about like that strategy of drawing the subject matter experts. It was really driven by who we were selling to, right? And really trying to get a deep understanding of who those people were. You wrote that post at Animals about your blog is not a publication, and I think it was kind of saying, we did run a publication, but I think it worked because of that audience that we were trying to sell to. That it was a community. It was people who were going to like, if they learned anything about product building from Intercom, they would then, definitely consider us when they had an opportunity to use us as a product to communicate with their customers. That's not going to work in every instance. And actually, I agree with you. I think most people's content marketing is far better to think of it as a library rather than a publication. But we had that buy-in from the top. One of the co-founders of Intercom, Des Traynor, he famously wrote the first 93 of 100 blog posts on Inside Intercom. Owen, who's the CEO, just really got like the potential of it. They'd like seen it work for HubSpot, for Basecamp, for folks like that. And so they really gave us the space and put the investment into it to run a publication. So yeah, it was really, really powerful, and we made sure that publication was written mostly by the subject matter experts of the company rather than like the content marketers. And whether that meant totally ghostwriting something, whether it meant like interviewing someone and just writing that up as their own byline piece. Some people were great at, like, you literally get them in a room and a whiteboard, and then one of our team would create a blog post or podcast episode on the basis of that. But like, just figuring out whatever it was it took to get that subject matter expertise and get it into our output. That's
so interesting, because I don't think a content marketer could have ever pulled that off. Like someone with a content marketing background, I mean, like, I feel like I assume that your journalism background played a pretty significant role in that, and it was a harder way to do it too, right? I mean, it's harder to execute, at least I imagine.
Yeah, I mean, I think yeah, and I think the one thing I think that I always said to people about it was, because people always go like they want the, like, what should I do? Tell me what to do. And I'm like, well, this worked for us, and I think one of the reasons it worked for us was it stood out.
Definitely.
If you think about it at the time, had like a lot of the content marketing that people looked up to at the time was things like HubSpot and Buffer, which was very search orientated. It was, a lot of it was like, it was a volume play. It was like, do a lot of keyword research, make sure you hit a lot of those keywords, and it worked amazingly for them. Like, I'm not saying it in any judgmental way. And so it was like, well, hey, we were a 60-person company, 4 Irish founders, set up in San Francisco in 2011. How many like startups were founded in San Francisco in 2011? And you're trying to stand out from the noise. And so I think that sort of philosophy of like a publication that like publishes subject matter experts from around the company, it was pretty unique for us. And then we really just sort of, as we showed that worked and we started to get more traction, it was like, okay, how do we double down on this? Like, let's do books, but like, let's do books that like feel like, they're 40,000 words. So like, even just down to the little details, like an ISSN number, like that they were properly registered books with a barcode. Like literally someone would put one person would work on it for a quarter, not one person, but like, it was like, whether it was like 2 weeks of my time and 4 weeks of Jeffrey's time, but like it was, and a designer 4 weeks, we put a lot of work into that to kind of like, again, stand out and sort of say, we're going to produce high value books that, like, at the time, again, I think a lot of stuff was like, let's do a 10-page PDF and gate it. And it was just how do we stand out from the noise? Yeah,
totally.
Which I don't think is ever a good idea.
Yeah. I think I read Intercom on starting up on my Kindle. I think you published an EPUB version.
Yep.
And I think maybe there was even some of those books became audiobooks, but sort of released in podcast format too, right?
Yeah, so that, again, just a big philosophy I always have is like, content is, and particularly the kind of content we created at Intercom, is expensive to make. So just trying to think about, like, are there ways to get that into different formats, or like repurpose it, reslice it, and redice it. So first off, again, just going back to the, like, trying to make them feel like proper books rather than, like, we didn't even call them ebooks. Actually, that was a big thing. We had a rule internally. We just never referred to them as ebooks, because I think ebooks, particularly less so maybe now, but like, in 2014, 2015, they were kind of seen as a bit lower value, and there was a lot of free ebooks out there. So we always called them books. We made sure they were always available for your Kindle, for your Apple device, or just plain old PDF if you wanted, but just give people the choice, and what you'd expect as well if you bought a book from like any of the big publishers as well. Yeah. But then, we subsequently decided to do them as audiobooks. And we had a successful podcast, so it was like, just let's chunk them up as like episodic books. And then Intercom and starting up, we actually printed them. I printed 10,000 of them. Kind of was like a ask Des trainer for forgiveness rather than permission, but like it was like they were going to be about like $11 or $12 per piece if we published, like, I think like 2,000 of them, and I was like, oh, we can get them like $6 a piece if we go big. But they were.
And you shipped them to people? Like, people ordered them and you shipped individual books out?
Yeah, we sold them like, basically, I think it was like, I can't remember exactly the pricing at the time, but it was like $10, and then like shipping depending on where you were. Like, we were just about breaking even on them. Like, barely breaking even on them. But we would like visitors to the office. We'd give them to the sales team. We'd go out on sales calls. I'd bring
I
books.
love
There are
that.
conferences. So it was a huge part of our marketing probably for about 18 months. So actually, when you think about it, like the unit charge was pretty low, and it was just again, it stood out at the time. I think like there are plenty of people who've done books at this stage. I know other people have done like books before us. I mean, we didn't invent it, but certainly tried to stand out from like maybe our peers in B2B SaaS at the time.
Yeah. Wow. That's so interesting. I'm picturing like your office just like full of books and like orders come in and you're like putting them in an envelope, mailing them out. But I assume like, was it, they were drop shipped, I assume?
Yeah, we worked like actually we worked initially. We had a bit of an issue actually with the printer. The printer had a service where they actually would ship them. To be honest, it was a bit hit and miss, and like that was a huge thing for us. Like it had to be perfect,
Mm.
like because our brand reputation was on the line. So actually, we found a company that did fulfillment in Austin, Texas, that ship all kinds of merch and swag for tech companies, and they did a great job. I mean,
That's
literally
awesome.
that thing just ran itself in the background, and as I said, it was roughly cost neutral. We were probably like sometimes, depending on what territory we were in, we were losing money shipping you a book, but other people we were making like maybe a few cents. So it was, it all worked out in the end. I think it definitely delivered a lot more value than it cost.
So interesting. We'll link to that stuff because I want people to be able to see it in
Yeah,
real life. The reason that I wrote the blog post about your blog is not a publication was because I was so tired
yeah,
of on sales calls people saying like at Animals people say like, oh, we would like to be the intercom for human resources. We would like to be the
yeah,
intercom for whatever. And it was kind of a frustrating conversation to have because you can't be. I promise you can't
yeah,
be. Like, and part of the argument that we made was like, okay, Intercom probably raised $100+ million. Content team is, I don't know, 10 people, 12 people. I probably, they've made a serious commitment to this serious
mm,
commitment. You can't just, do like thought leadershipy style content and say it's Intercom for X. But it sounds
yeah,
like I'm imagining you probably got some of that too, saying like, oh, can you help us do this? Like we want to kind of do the same thing that Intercom's done for our
yeah.
business.
Totally. I know, like as I kind of alluded to at the beginning, like it was dependent on the market we were in, why it was successful. Um, Also, like Intercom didn't try and be like brilliant at all parts of marketing straight away. I mean, I would say like product marketing was really strong. We were really strong at like doing product launches. We had like really good thoughtful positioning in terms of the product, all that stuff you'd expect from product marketing. We were great at events, and events were a huge partner
Mm,
for content. Like we sort of thought of like events as like live content, so we worked very closely with the events team. But things like PR and like brand marketing and stuff were like followed much later. In many ways, like content was our brand marketing for a long time. Design was
right.
another area we invested in hugely, but we weren't trying to do all things at all times. I actually think that's something I see at the moment with a lot of marketing teams is like they're trying to do everything out of the gate day one. And actually, I
Mm,
think it's like, we saw content and saw the potential, or certainly actually, to be fair, Des and Owen saw the potential when they hired me, and like I bought into that vision. But yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And as I say, like I really kind of like spent the first year really trying to understand the buyers, and like whether it was going to like conferences, like early days 60-person startup who was like literally like, hey, we need people for a stand, and I was like, yeah, I'll be there, I'll go to a conference, because I just wanted to eyeball the people who were going to be buying Intercom, and like, how do they
yeah.
talk, like what do they look like, where do they hang out, like where do they read stuff, and just spending time with them. And I know that's obviously in a post-COVID world, it's quite different, but like just really, and again, this is probably a little bit informed by the product team at Intercom, this idea of almost falling in love with the problem, like fall in love with the like your customer and finding out like what are their problems, and then I think you figure out like what's the content strategy
Ah,
that's
that's
going to
such
reach
a,
those people, that's going to help those people.
I love that fall in love with the customer because I feel like a lot of content marketers fall in love with content marketing.
Yeah,
Like they, uh, they sort of like come into this world and start learning about it, and they fall in love with the process of the writing or the research or the optimizing, and there's like important skills, like no question about it. You have to learn how to do those things, but it's
totally,
all in
totally.
service
But I
of this
think there's a lot
customer,
of
which
yeah, there's a lot of cookie cutter content marketing. It's like, hey, okay, you set up a blog, you do a podcast, you do books, but sometimes I don't think there's like enough time spent trying to really understand it. Like, will like I don't know, maybe we're selling to like finance teams. Will they read a book? Like, do they want a book? Is that how they consume content? Is that the best way to deliver it? All that kind of stuff. And I think the only way to do that is to, I don't know, get on sales calls, or like with obviously things like Gong nowadays. You don't even have to get on sales calls. You can just like watch
Yeah, what a
your
cool
sales
tool.
team's calls. Yeah, just whatever way you can, just try and get as much a sense of like the worlds that like your customers and your potential customers inhabit, and then from there, I think you start to get creative ways of like how do I reach them.
Yeah. I think I would point to Intercom as an example of a company with content culture. And like, what I mean by that is basically
Yep.
like top down buy-in on content. The
Mm-hmm.
founders did it themselves. They were like clearly invested in it. Like it sets the team up for success if they're in this environment where like everybody wants them to win and kind of believes in them and all that. Is that true? Is that a thing?
Yeah. Totally. I actually was talking to someone earlier today, and I shared this story. So hopefully, Des, who's the co-founder of Intercom, won't mind me sharing it with a larger group. But between when I sort of like signed my contract to join Intercom and to actually join, I was like serving out my notice period. I met him for a coffee, and he was like, "I really can't wait for you to join." And he was like, "There's so much stuff like I want to take off my plate." And he was like, he showed me. He actually had set up an RSS feed from the blog to I think it was Campaign Monitor he was using as the email tool at the time. But literally every Wednesday at 5:30, an email would go out to people who had subscribed with the new blog posts that had been added to the blog. But it meant that he was forced to write at least one post or source a
That's
post every week.
awesome.
Like
That's so interesting.
someone said, you literally he had sort of chained his legs to the chair, forcing himself to do it. But it forced that discipline, and I think that's a huge thing for something like the kind of strategy we had at Intercom. It's that regularity of publishing and turning up in people's inboxes and adding some value, like giving them something of use every week.
Yeah.
Um, and sometimes those posts, and I think that would admit it, like they could be light, it could be just like, hey, here's like one of my favorite books and here's what I learned from it. But equally, he was churning out like really high value stuff about things he'd learned about building software, because they had a consultancy business before that as well. So he knew a lot about building product. It wasn't just from his experience at Intercom.
Yeah. Yeah. There was a post, I think it was Des that wrote it like early on about, I think it was about the death of mobile apps.
Yeah.
Does that ring a bell? That like blew up.
Yeah, that was Paul Adams,
Oh,
who's
okay.
our head of products. Paul used to write these super in depth, like 2,000, 4,000 word posts. The other one he did was like basically a deep dive on how the product team was organized at Intercom, like right down to like what meetings they had, how they made decisions, how they did their road mapping process. And that stuff was huge because like every other product team in SaaS, like people are always looking for that kind of information. And I
That
suppose, there was some level of success at Intercom at that stage. Like we got to maybe Series C at that point, and so people looked up to that content.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I remember reading the mobile apps post and just being like, I'm not a product person. I don't even like really get all this stuff, but I'm just like fascinated that it's like real, that like this person is
Yeah,
explaining this thing that they know a ton about and all the problems. I was like, this is really good content, you know? Um,
absolutely.
were there ever, did you ever get pushback? Was there ever like a campaign that was like a step too far, that was like a vision that was like too big that leadership was like, whoa, John, slow down a minute.
Um, well, I think there was definitely some pretty crazy stuff we did on particularly on the more on the event side, and like we did world tours and wanted to do. We did a live product launch in Bill Graham Theater in San Francisco, and I think
Oh,
sometimes
wow.
we probably got ahead of ourselves a little bit. But I mean, my partner on that, like the head of the events team, Megan Sheridan, just did some amazing stuff that pushed the company forward, and I think just really, some people were uncomfortable, but it really, our brand was way big. I think, for the size of the company at the time, like our brand in the market was way bigger as a result. Um, but I mean, I think there was always, a philosophy at Intercom of like, going back to first principles. So there was always like, we rarely did stuff that like we hadn't kind of road tested internally, and people had asked like, and why, and why, and why, and like, what's that going to do for the business? So, there's probably way more stuff that ended up on the cutting room floor that I don't even remember at this point that ever saw the light of the day than stuff that did.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the one thing I suppose about like we never really cracked at Intercom, and I tried a couple of times internally, was video. Like we never figured out like what would the video version of like the Intercom blog have been like. Could we have given those product lessons, in some kind of video format? Like that would probably look like a series of Loom videos these days. Maybe we would like do product teardowns or something. Who knows? I don't know. But like that was definitely something I think probably just because of the skills that were on the team internally. That we didn't ever crack.
How about hiring? I'm curious how you built the team, because not remote, right? You had teams in Dublin and San Francisco. And also, like, it's a slightly different skill set. You're not looking for content creators. You're looking for this. I don't know exactly how you describe it, but a facilitator.
We editors, we call them.
Okay.
And actually, we like for a long time, for a period, we actually changed every job title to like editor, like senior editor or like just content editor. But purely because like we wanted to make sure that people were clear that the job was much more like working with subject matter experts, trying to get their views out on the blog, rather than maybe the more rounded content marketer, which I think that you kind of talked about. But hiring, because we needed to work with subject matter experts, I was based in Dublin. Intercom had an office in Dublin and San Francisco from day one. But then I knew I needed people in San Francisco because like half the company was there, so I was going to need people to work with the subject matter experts there. So I mean, it was tough. Again, like I kind of said, we had like maybe I don't know, like probably a couple of hundred venture-backed startups founded in the same year in 2011, and then there was more and more coming down the line. And you're like this kind of like Intercom developing a bit of a brand, but like not that well known. So I spent just a lot of time in San Francisco just having coffee meetings. Like, hey, like someone knows someone at Slack who works in content. Just like I don't know if I even want to hire this person necessarily, but like I certainly want to go and meet them and have coffee and just talk about what's going on and just network like crazy every time I was in San Francisco. And so I actually found that building out a team was something that I really enjoyed. Finding great people, hiring them and mentoring them. I mean, Fiona Lee, who I hired to run the content team in San Francisco for me, like I subsequently rehired her to work with me in Ramp when I moved there. I just met some fantastic people, and they weren't always like from the obvious, like, oh, they've done content for X number of years in this role, like, or done content marketing. So for instance, Fiona had worked in Google and done support content. She was like working at caring.com at that point and was doing like much more kind of an SEO focused strategy. But like I really saw that she could come in and help us grow a team and like grow that kind of editorial machine that we were building in San Francisco and Dublin offices.
I actually applied for an Intercom content role at one point, probably 2015, maybe 2016. And I had a call with probably a recruiter. And my whole thing was like, maybe they'll let me be remote. And they were very clear. No, it's not. This is a Dublin based role. And I was like, okay. And they're like, do you want to kind of proceed with this process?
I think I remember that conversation. I was like, hey, this guy's pretty good, but do we want to have remote?
So funny. Well, my wife and I, like, we both have Irish heritage somewhere down the line. So we were like, you live in Dublin? Like, that could be cool. We talked about it for like 10 minutes before we were like, that's probably not going to work. And obviously didn't happen. But I did find that to be just sort of, I actually, at the time, I was like, oh, remote's the greatest thing in the world. I would never go back to an office. Like nowadays, I'm like, I would do anything to go to an office. I would love to go work with some people in person, I am curious about the transition to Ramp. How, what, when, where, why, Ramp, for context, spend management tool. I mean, I'm generalizing a little bit. Is that more or less accurate?
They have a corporate card, which is probably the way that a lot of people would know them. I'd see people using a Ramp card, but yeah, I have a whole kind of suite of kind of expense and spend management software, whether it's like paying your bills, putting budgets, giving teams budgets and allowing them to manage them themselves. The way we talked about it was like we basically want to like look after all your non-payroll spend. So yeah, they were on a tear. They're like New York based fintech company. And yeah, I went in there just in 2021, like third marketing hire, and just like sort of built out the content and comms function there. But it was a very, very different strategy and approach than Intercom. Like I think there was always, like, even though we never called it community as such, but like we knew we were kind of building this like community around the content we built, that people were going to continue to consume it over time, and like it wouldn't always be a really quick conversion path. But if you think about it, like a finance tool like that, people are going to they're going to be frustrated with the current solution, and they're literally going to start looking for something else. So like it was much more about search from day one, an SEO strategy, and a lot of customer evidence, like making sure that like we were showing the success that customers were having with Ramp, and a certain amount of like kind of editorial and kind of like really making it clear like how Ramp approach things differently than say like Brex or other competitors, like really sort of getting our philosophy out there of like how we were approaching things. Like for instance, we went heavily on the fact that like we don't have points or multipliers. We gave you cash back, and just really went strong on trying to get that across all the time.
Yeah, Superpath is a customer actually. It's a cool tool. It's really helpful. Yeah. That's interesting. Were there like what you just described, was that all obvious like when you walked in the door? Or I guess I'm curious about like the feeling out period. Yeah. Like what's the like you're hired, like there's obviously like you're one of the best content marketers ever. Like you're gonna come up with something that's great. But like I feel like it takes a little bit of time to get your feet under you and figure out like this new customer, this new market, what's your strategy? Do you have new constraints to work with potentially?
Yeah, no, it was like, I mean, there was all sorts of things that weren't, like, some of that was apparent from the outside. So some of it was not. I mean, like one of the things that's really interesting, and I actually was speaking to someone today about this because they've got a similar setup, but you're the person who is the buyer is not the person who's going to make sure your tool is successful. And so, in the instance today, it was someone who's like a technical tool that like they sell to CTOs, but they've got to get the developers to implement it and really like get on side with it. Equally at Ramp, you sold generally to like a founder or a CFO or a head of finance or someone like that. But if you think about it, it was actually like the accounting team, like the day-to-day accounting team, who were going to have to like move bills or various other things from like their existing solution to Ramp. So we used to talk about this idea of share of wallet, that you get in there and like you roughly know what their like card spending or their bill payments in a year is, and how much of that have you got at any given time. But it was also from a content perspective, it was like, we've two very different audiences there. Like a head of finance, a founder of a company is going to have very different kind of content they're going to want or consume, versus like an accountant or a controller or someone who's actually at the cold face of finance every day. So those kind of things were really, really interesting. The other thing I suppose that that was different at Ramp, and which I think is going to become more of a thing, is that like I oversaw content and communications, which was effectively public relations. And I just think the way the media landscape is going, that you're just going to see a lot more of that, and it just makes a lot more sense. That like if you have a team that's internally creating good content, if you can like give that content to the media and sort of, basically the media has never been so under resourced as it is now, and yet they need to do more and more. So if you can give them, whether it's like data points, and like we started doing a quarterly benchmark report about like the spending patterns on Ramp, like literally what are like 10,000 US businesses spending their money on, like what's going up, what's going down. We did like in summer of 2021, we did a big report about back to the office. Like, are people actually going back to the office? How much are we seeing this in terms of our spend? And it was very interesting. You could literally, I think there was like a 2-week period in March 2021 where suddenly you saw like spending on facilities and like office cleaning and things like that went through the roof, because it was obviously like people are reopening, like, oh, no one's been in the office for a year, we better like get the office going again. Equally, you saw spending on things like people had like a lot of stuff like I was going to say Deliveroo, which is the Irish service, but DoorDash and services like that, where obviously they've been letting their team get like maybe lunch once a week at home or whatever, or suddenly that like spending in those categories started to decline. But again, just thinking about like, is there stories in your product? Like, is there data points in your product that you can then use for like content in terms of traditional content marketing, but also like get that stuff out to the media and get press for it as well. Which
That's cool.
You're going to see a lot more of that. Yeah,
I love that. I feel like COVID forced that a little bit too. Like I recall in like spring 2020, like still at Animals and talking with a lot of our customers and realizing that most of these companies, content is their only real direct line of communication to anybody, whether it's a customer to the media to anybody. And I feel like that probably some companies really leaned into that and realized that content has maybe this larger role to play, which I think is generally good because like these people are well equipped to do it anyways. I'm curious about building a team there. So you probably don't know this. You hired a woman that I went to college with, Stephanie Gordon.
Stephanie.
People really don't know this. University of Delaware has a great track record of turning out excellent content marketers. Greg Ciotti, another University of Delaware alum. But I'm curious how you built that team because it's a different role, right? I mean, I guess, was it a different role? Were these people creating more content? Were they, what was their life like?
Probably a little bit more traditional content marketers. I think a big thing for us as well was we kind of felt like we needed probably a little bit more subject matter expertise on the content team rather than like the content team being the facilitators or bringing that subject matter expertise in from around the company. So actually, Stephanie definitely has specialized a lot more in sort of like finance content. So I think that was definitely it. I think something, we were using a lot more agencies. I mean, the thing is like just the growth at Ramp in terms of the business meant, there was a kind of a pressure to deliver quickly. So like the way to ramp up quickly, obviously, is you. Sorry to use the word ramp to talk about ramp, but the way you ramp up quickly is to use agencies. So there was a little bit more of that as well. Like the team there was managing freelancers and contractors and agencies a lot more than we ever did at Intercom, and sort of being that sort of like bringing that ramp voice and that ramp stamp to what those folks were doing and making sure it seemed like coherent to people who are on the receiving end of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. We made a course at one point about vendor management because I feel like it's emerged as a really important skill. It's just the easiest way to scale your output. But to your point, you have to make it work. It's really not the agency's responsibility ultimately to make it work. Yeah, it's your responsibility. I think whoever the point of contact is.
Yeah, it's something I've seen, and it happened at Ramp. There was some agencies hired before they had someone in seat. So, for instance, there was an SEO agency that was hired, but there was no one really to manage that SEO agency and to really think about like what are the keywords and are they going after the right stuff. And so it didn't work out because you do need like whether it's that like there's a content person or even an in-house SEO person, whoever, but someone who can closely manage that agency. If you aren't doing that, you're not going to get the value out of the agency. It's not a substitute for having people in-house. It's really like think about it as a way to augment the people you have in-house.
Right. Do you think about content cadence a lot? Like I guess when I think about content strategy, the first thing I think of is like budget and then cadence, like how much, and maybe this might just be personal bias, but I'm like, okay, I think like a piece of content costs X. So with this budget, we can do Y number of pieces per month. And like, maybe that's not the right place to start, but I am curious, like, like in both of these cases, you're creating a lot of content. Do you feel the cadence is important? Are there peaks and valleys to it? Like where times you're publishing more and going harder? Do you believe more in like that even cadence, like you mentioned with Des, of like the Wednesday email going out, whether there's an article in it or not?
I think it's like I always kind of use the word regularity as much as sort of cadence, and it's like when we got into doing podcasts at Intercom, this was like a lesson that just it was stunning to me. But so we decided to do a podcast, which at the time was like, ooh, should we do a branded podcast? And will people even listen to a branded podcast? This was 2015. Obviously now, it's a no-brainer. Like I think nearly every startup, probably more startups doing podcasts than blogs these days, right? But we said we'd be scrappy. We'd just try and get 10 episodes out, just see if there was an audience. Like, would people even listen to sort of, like similar content to the blog, but would people even want to consume it like as a podcast? And so we just got like 10 episodes out just to see was there like an audience. As a result, we were being scrappy. We just literally kind of like put episodes out when they were ready. And we saw enough to kind of go double down. But actually, someone who was selling me or wanted to talk to me about selling a tool said to me, just stick to a day and as close as you can to a time, and literally get it out every time. Like, we went Thursday at 5:30 Dublin time, and it was like you could see it in the listenership. Once we went on a regular cadence, it was like the listenership started to take off. And then when we went from once every 2 weeks to every week, it was the same thing. So yeah, I think it's just like get into a cadence that is realistic and deliverable. And even simple stuff. I used to talk to like I'm sure anyone who's listened to this doesn't need to be told this, but like, I used to see that thing of people who would like start a blog in particular with like a fit of enthusiasm, and they're like, publishing 3 times a week, and literally they run out of steam after 6 weeks. They've created 18 posts. But if you published 18 posts once a week, over 18 weeks, I guarantee you those exact same posts would have you'd build an audience much more effectively. You'd start to get, because as we all know, like it's like a quarter or two of like probably pretty static low growth, and then suddenly it starts to take off. I mean, every content marketing project or team I've worked on has had the same sort of shape of graph. So yeah, I think it's cadence, regularity, call it what you want, but yeah, I think there's a lot to be said for figuring that out rather than and just sticking to it. And obviously, as I say, it takes maybe 2 quarters probably to see the results, but you will start to see early feedback, which means it's not a case of like, let's just stick to this blindly for 6 months and see what happens. But I think it's vital to figure out what the cadence you can deliver is, right? Whether it's like just literally sitting down and going, how much money do we have versus how much does each content piece cost to produce.
You mentioned something I wanted to just touch on quickly. You're right, and I feel like that's like an accepted consensus that content marketing takes a while, but people are also quite impatient and not always willing to wait. And so, like, I think what you pointed out was that there should be some feedback. Like, it's not that it's just like nobody and then lots of people. There's signals, and I wonder if those signals are more anecdotal. Somebody saying, "Hey, I really liked this," or like maybe you pick up a mention or a link in a place that's like fairly meaningful. Like, even if it doesn't send floods of people your direction, it's like, oh, okay, that's good. Like, we're making some progress here.
Exactly. You shouldn't have to like have really complicated like metrics or KPIs, or like you should just be able to eyeball it and see like we're getting qualitative feedback. Oh, look, this person who's an influencer in the space has like shared our article, or the CEO like bumped into someone at a conference and said, "Oh, I saw like blog post you guys put out," or like you will get that signal. And I actually think sometimes people like over engineer it to begin with, and then it's like as a result they kind of lose their nerve and can things before it has a chance to really perform.
Yeah, that's interesting. We do have we've got like 5 minutes left. I want to be respectful of your time. We got a question here from Ryan. He says, does John have any tips on how to start building an audience through all channels, content, social, email, etc.? I would add to that, is it the same audience? Like, are you reaching the same people in different ways, or do you think of those different channels as reaching potentially different sets of people?
I think it's, I don't know if they're different sets, but I mean, obviously you go through all those channels because like you just have to be respectful that some people are going to want to consume you in different ways. And it kind of goes back to the way I thought about the podcast. It was like, did it open a new audience, or did it open it up to like people at a different time? Like, hey, I'm at the gym, and so, I can't sit down and read like a 1,200 word Intercom blog post, but I can definitely listen to a podcast. So, and you're just giving people that choice of like, hey, if you want to consume this stuff in a different way, we've got a way for you to do it. In terms of how to start, like, just do all the stuff that doesn't scale. I think at like Ramp, I remember when we launched our podcast, I was like, okay, there's 250 people in this company and we do not have 250 likes on Apple Podcasts. What, and I used kind of a word that Irish people use a lot. I was like, this is crazy. You kind of have to be like, get everyone behind it. We like, we're very like, content's something that people can get behind. And as you said, like, oftentimes it's the only sort of like channel that people have to sort of like communicate outside the company, or it's like certainly the most visible one. And so it's like really just mobilize the whole company behind it, like in the early days. And I think just like have all those different touch points so that people like, if they are on your content channels, or sorry, on your social channels, that they like can get back to your blog, and then there's like an opportunity to subscribe, make it easy for them to like share that content, whether it's like, sign up for a newsletter, make it easy for them to share it with a friend. Just really, really, it is a bit of a startup cliche, but just do the like stuff that doesn't scale right at the beginning. Like every single subscriber or reader you can get is a huge win. And try and get everyone in the company behind you. If there's only 10 people in the company when you join to do content, that's a network that's 10 times larger than your network. So really, really, really tap into that.
Yeah.
It's tougher now. Like there's not like, there used to be sort of like, you go, oh, well, we're selling into HR, and like there's this HR community over here that like, if we just spend time there, we can, most of these communities are fragmented now. It's quite hard to find one place where you can distribute your content or really start building an audience. But what I have done in more laterally is just try and like figure out like what are those fragmented communities, and like maybe you target 2 or 3 at a time, and see which one's working. If you're finding something doesn't work, move on quickly, and like every month you're trying new ones to get your content out in. Also, just I think close the loop in a big way as well between like if someone shares, you're starting out and someone shares your content on social, make sure that like they come back to like from the brand handle or whatever. Really just make it clear to people that like whether, as I say, they're internal. We used to even have league tables of like the most read blog posts every month and the most read authors on Inside Intercom, and try and get like some friendly internal competition going, like just get people excited about it. But that was huge for us, that sort of internal one. We call it Project Dopamine at Intercom, which was just like making sure people get that shot of dopamine when they've gone to the effort of creating content with you, that they know how it's benefited the company and benefits their career as well internally.
Yeah, we do. We have for one more question, John. I know we're basically up on time here.
Sure, yeah.
So if you guys, can you go deeper on how you prioritize and dedicate resources for content across audiences? The example being CFO versus the accountant, and quantifying the differences in the impact. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think like it's really just making sure you're aligned with the kind of the company and broader marketing and go-to-market strategy. So, for instance, like early on, my time at Ramp, it was very much like we need to get new customers. Like let's top of funnel growth, so it was like much more of a focus on the CFO founder stuff. Trying to get more people aware of Ramp. And actually, it was comms and PR more than content. I think that really helped with that a lot. Well, it's probably the combination of the two. We were lucky to have sort of like raised big fundraising rounds, which grabbed a lot of attention. But like it was really making sure that we were turning that attention into business. So like making sure we could convert that interest. But then obviously, like over time and sort of in later quarters, the company strategy was like, okay, let's think more about like how do we get more of that share of the wallet? How do we expand when we're in these? Like we've done the land, now we need to do the expand. And so at that point, it was thinking about the accountant, or it was thinking about the person or the controller or whoever the person was who was going to run the card program. So that was when we added someone to look after customer education and run things like onboarding webinars and more content that would like help people get more value out of Ramp once it was actually already in the business. But yeah, and quantifying the differences in the impact, I think that's like obviously depending on if you're going after the founder and CFO, it was like new business, it was leads. It was like are we getting people into the funnel? Are we getting people to sign up? Whereas for the accountant, the person who ran the card program, it was much more about share of wallet. Like, are we expanding within those accounts? And so, yeah, I mean, obviously it'll be different for every company, but that's the way we kind of thought about it.
Got it. Really cool. Pretty sure it's getting on 6 p.m. for you. So I feel like we should wrap up, let you get on with your day, but you're consulting now.
Yes.
Which I'm curious to know about.
Yeah. So, yeah, I mean, like I've always been interested in kind of like starting new things. I'm not the kind of guy to come and like run a mature process. So, I've kind of also, I think, like I had a pretty like run from like pretty full on journalism career to straight into Intercom, 7-year run there, saw a lot of growth, 1.5 at Ramp, saw a lot of growth. So took a few weeks off over the summer, just needed to reset and recharge, and now working a lot on content strategy with clients. And also I think a lot of consultants come along and give you a strategy, but they don't necessarily help you to go figure out like how we actually going to implement this. So doing work as well with them on like the org design, like who do you need to hire in-house for this, what's going to be going to an agency, like are the contractors who can do some of this, and then even helping sort of like hire those agencies, contractors, or even in-house folks to deliver on the strategy.
That's amazing. And is that geared towards the same type of company as Intercom and Ramp? Like sort of you're helping them get it going from basically the ground up? Yeah, I mean, generally, I would say that the sweet spot for me and like the first couple of clients, they have like a marketing team. They may have already started some content efforts, so like they see the potential. But yeah, I mean, if you haven't like got at least some of the basics of marketing in place, it probably doesn't make sense for me to come and work with you. Like, you need to have like a sense of like who your buyer is, like what your positioning is, your messaging, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, once you've got those things in place, like kind of roughly Series A, Series B, in terms of venture-backed companies, I would say is kind of the sweet spot, or the one where I've been having a lot of fruitful conversations, and actually both my first clients are at that kind of stage. So excited to see where it goes. That's cool. Can we send people anywhere? Do you have a personal website, or is LinkedIn, Twitter, anywhere we should?
LinkedIn, probably just check out. I think what am I on LinkedIn? John Collins Ireland. What is my profile? Oh my gosh, I should know that. I will have a website. Yeah, John Collins LinkedIn, but I'm like / John Collins Ireland.
Okay, cool. We'll link to it.
Me. But, yeah.
Cool. Yeah, we'll definitely link to that, and we'll link to all the stuff that you mentioned in the notes we put along with the recording here. And just in general, thank you, John. Like, you're just such a wealth of knowledge on this. You have some amazing experience to share. So we're really, we have the link in the chat now.
Thank you very much.
We're just really grateful for you to come hang out, spend some time with us. And yeah, thank you. Thanks for being a part of Superpath.
And thanks for putting together the community. If nothing else, about like I lurk from time to time. I've certainly learned some stuff from it, but if nothing else, it's also a great way to keep in touch with former colleagues on Slack.
For sure. Oh yeah, that's actually, we find that's like, when we look at our analytics, there's way more DMs than public messages, and I think a lot of it is that.
You should have an alumni product where you
get,
like content team alums to keep in touch.
That's a good idea, actually. I kind of like that. Well, cool. Thank you, John. We'll link to all your stuff. Really appreciate it again. And have a great day. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. And all the great questions. Cheers.
Take care.